you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. As I mentioned last week, this week I got my blood drawn for donation at my local blood donation bus. I'm not sure specifically what that is normally referred to, perhaps a mobile donation unit. But in my area, in the North Carolina and South Carolina area, it is a bus by a group called the Blood Connection, and they service those specific states. Now, this was my first time giving blood, so today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the experience, as well as chat about iron, what that does for your blood and your body, as well as that COVID-19 antibody testing that a lot of blood banks have been performing lately on donor blood. We're going to talk about what that is, what that isn't, and what it really means. So first off, today I gave blood for the first time. I have tried to give blood in the past, but as a very small person, I was unable to because I'm 5'2", and I have historically weighed about 110 pounds or just under it. And that's really the threshold for the weight for giving blood. So I made sure that I ate enough this last week and I didn't work out too hard at the gym. My goal is to gain more muscle, but I was afraid I was also going to burn more fat in that process. So I took a little bit of a mini break and also did some family stuff this week. So I digress. It was a really good time for all of it. But we went and gave blood today for the first time. They weighed me and I made my goal. I was trying to stay right at 112 or a little bit higher, which is what I had weighed at the last time I went to the gym and checked. I don't keep a scale in the house because it's not really about the weight for me. It's about if I feel healthy for my personal health and wellness journey. But I did weigh myself there and I was still 111.8 pounds this time. So they made sure they weighed me and everything, and we were good to go. So I was very excited that I actually got to give blood this time. I waited out my quarantine period and everything after I moved here from Texas, so I was not going to be contagious to any of my phlebotomists or anyone else who was nearby, even if I was asymptomatic. Granted, that is also if I got it in Texas and not necessarily if I picked it up since in North Carolina. But you get my point. I went through all of the appropriate steps and I was very psyched to be able to actually go in and give blood. Now, I don't know my blood type. That's just something that has, fortunately enough for me, never had to come up before. I think my mom told me at one point I was O something, but I just didn't really keep track of that. So, I let them know that, and just so y'all know, if you don't know your blood type, that's not a deal breaker for blood donation centers. I Googled that ahead of time, so I was aware that that wasn't going to stop me. But just in case you were worried that it might stop you, that's okay. They're going to test your blood for your blood type when you go in. They're also going to prick one of your fingers with a little lancet so that they can also test your blood and see what your iron levels are. They do that very quickly at the beginning while you are answering some of the questions and getting your blood pressure drawn so they can make sure that you are good to go, and they will still take your temperature orally even in the era of COVID-19, although you do have to wear a mask otherwise for the entirety of your visit, at least with the blood connection. Remember, we're there to save lives with our blood, so also it can be very helpful to save folks by wearing our masks. So we're going to use our cardiovascular system and our respiratory system to keep other people's health and wellness in mind as well as our own. It was a very interesting experience, having never been there before. If you go online to a website like the Blood Connection and sign up like I did, the one that I did was sponsored by one of our local breweries, and they can usually provide you the link to the website or the bus service webpage that you'll be using. And on that page, you can enter your profile information. So like most things on the internet, it's going to be your name, your email address, your phone number, and your date of birth. They're just checking some things to make sure that you clear for the first part of being old enough to give blood and also being able to be a specific height and or weight. So they can let you know whether or not you're disqualified. They don't want to waste your time either. That just really keeps everyone on the same page. But it's not like a full medical history or anything like that. It was super quick and easy to sign up for it. I was done in like 2 minutes or so, especially if you have autofill for a lot of your regular information, like your name and phone number. Although I totally understand if you also are not comfortable using those. I get it. Everything is collecting our data nowadays. But I did go in and give them that information. It confirmed my appointment time, and then I showed up about 10 minutes early and did some of the initial paperwork, letting them know I didn't know my blood type, things like that, name, address, phone number again, just written down. And then they assigned me a donor ID number because it was my first time. Turns out you can also request your donor ID number online, at least on the website for the Blood Connection. So I'm not sure about how that works outside of this group that is specifically in North Carolina and South Carolina, but they very well may work the same way for you too. So if you have that donor ID number, which you can either get in person there on your first donation, or you can request one online, then you can connect that with your profile and get your results from that blood donation there as well. So I don't mean like HIV or hepatitis or anything like that. This is specifically for going through and donating your blood to save other people's lives and things like that. But what I do mean is that they are testing it for COVID-19 antibodies. They are going to identify your blood type, etc. So if you wanted to just see what the results of those things are, then you can go ahead and check it out on the website once they have processed your blood and you have connected that donor ID. Now, I just did mine today and I haven't been able to connect the donor ID yet, but I think that the blood drive may still be ongoing. So it may just take some time to get that information gathered. Remember, these are still lab tests, so who knows? But I do want to talk to you guys a little bit about the experience as we patiently wait just to see if I have had COVID-19 before. And we'll talk in a little bit about what specifically that antibody testing tells you. It's not a diagnostic procedure. I will tell you that right now. But we'll delve more into that later. The first thing that happened after I got there and I signed that paperwork was they were running a little bit behind when my appointment was, which is to be expected. It's a blood drive. There are lots of first-timers like myself, so it really just depends on who's filling out the paperwork and who is exactly on time or early for their appointment and so on. So I was about 10 minutes early or so, and the guy said it would be about 20 minutes before they got to me, so it was only 10 minutes behind. And honestly, they were done in like a super reasonable amount of time, like even surpassing reasonable, considering that it was a medical facility inside of a bus, y'all. These people are highly efficient and are excellent at what they do. So I asked the guy if I could go get a coffee, and he made sure that I drank enough water already, which I had. They have you chug 16 ounces of water at home or on your way there before you give blood. I ate a big meal that morning, and I was ready to go. So he said as long as I'd recently had enough water, then I should be fine getting an iced coffee, just not to grab anything that was very strong in caffeine, like an espresso or something. But y'all know how I love my caramel macchiatos, and that is where my allegiance lies in coffee. So I just went over to the local coffee shop, grabbed one of those, and walked back on over. It took me all of 5 minutes. Probably hung out there for a little bit with a kid who was waiting for his mom to finish donating blood, and we talked about Mr. Potato Head and Marvel and stuff like that. And then I went in. The nurse was super nice, although I'm not sure if she was a nurse per se, or specifically a phlebotomist, or what her title was. She didn't have a name tag, I don't believe, or not, at least not one that I saw, but she was super nice, and she came in and processed my paperwork, helped me walk through the questions I was going to answer, since there's like 42 questions that are all yes or no based. Like, have you been out of the country in the past 4 months, or did you live in these specific European cities for this amount of time or more during the ages of, or not the ages, but the years of like 1988 to 1996, things like that. And I definitely had not done those things. I was 7 years old in 1996, and I didn't take my first plane until I was well into adulthood. So that was really easy for me to breeze through. Didn't take more than about 5 minutes, and I'd also checked the questions online before, so I knew that I was good to go. It also asks about having recently gotten a tattoo, like in the past 2 to 4 months, I believe, and questions like that, again, you can find them online too. And if I had been able to figure out the donor ID thing ahead of time, I could have done my survey on the day of as well. You just have to do the survey within 24 hours of your appointment, just to make sure none of that medical information has changed since then. So she took my blood from my finger to check my iron. She said my iron was great for this, and I was honestly surprised because I'm generally pretty tired as a person all the time. So that was surprising to me, but she said it was good. So maybe all of those greens I've been eating have really been paying off. She also went ahead and took my blood pressure. She took my temperature orally, and I was fine, not presenting with a fever, so she asked me which arm I wanted it drawn from, and I just really showed her my veins, and I'm like, well, which one do you think would be easiest to get it from? And she picked the right one, so I was like, okay, you can draw it from the right one, because I normally get stabbed a lot. By well-meaning people, not just stabbed by strangers or anything like that, but rather by nurses trying to draw my blood, because sometimes my veins roll under. I'm now thinking that mostly has to do with the fact that I need to drink more water before my doctor's appointments, because I chugged that water today, and boy, it popped right up for the phlebotomist who did draw my blood. And when I told her I usually get stuck a lot, she was genuinely confused, and she's like, I don't see why, you have great veins. So that one's on me. I apologize to all of the nurses and phlebotomists in the past who have had trouble drawing blood from my veins. I may have just been dehydrated. So pro tip, drink at least as much water as they tell you to drink beforehand, which is about 16 ounces or more, and then maybe drink some more after that. It was a super quick process though. Once I was up in the chair, it's really laid back, so it's reclined a bit so that your head and back are in an upright position but reclined. It reclines further than the seats in airplanes, so It's pretty comfortable, actually. And then it also has an area with your legs on it that makes sure that your legs are pretty far up in the air. So think a dentist chair, kind of, but far more elevated. That's kind of what it's like. Then she went ahead and checked my vein on my right arm, and she stuck it 4 times, I think, just to try to locate the actual vein that she was going to use. But it was a very shallow device that made it look kind of like a straw with a needle inside, like a small coffee straw with a small needle inside, something like that. And it was almost the 4 points forming a trapezoid shape. And then she grabbed the needle and went ahead and stuck me. She did great getting it in there and everything. I was very impressed. And it wasn't all that painful, to be honest. And then she told me to make sure I kept my arm very still and taped down the needle for me. At first, when she told me to keep my arm still, I didn't quite understand that. But once the needle was in and then I happened to move my arm just a little, oh boy, that was a weird feeling. So maybe don't do that. If they say don't move your arm, it's probably for that reason. But it didn't make me woozy at all. She said every 5 to 7 seconds, go ahead and squeeze the gauze roll that she had put in my hand. And so I did that, and she drew some blood in some vials to be tested as well. So about 5 vials of blood, but it's super easy because it's already connected to the needle that is coming out of my arm. So there's only one needle that goes into that. And if you've had blood drawn at the doctor's office, you are probably very familiar with that as well. Except in this case, they just clamp off the flow to that area, and the blood afterwards goes through the other tube down into your blood bag, which sits on that little tray to be kind of tossed back and forth gently, like a ship on the ocean, in order to make sure that it doesn't clot and it does what it's supposed to do as it is collected. It really just mixes those anticoagulants in the blood bag with the blood that's entered in there, so they're immediately blended and well mixed in order to prevent clotting, because you can't really use clotted blood very well when you're trying to put it into another person. The whole process only took that 15 minutes, and when she was done, she went ahead and had me hold the bandage down on my arm once she pulled the needle out and just applied some pressure to it. Then she came back over and put a Band-Aid on it and wrapped it for me. The aftercare instructions are generally given to you on a piece of paper, but it just really tells you, hey, make sure you drink a lot of water after this. We talked about the importance of water in your blood supply in one of our previous episodes on cardiovascular health, as well as certain foods that can help you replenish iron. So things like spinach, or if you are into meat, red meat, things like that. It has a list on there, and it also has a list of things that contain vitamin C to help you absorb that iron into your body. So strawberries, orange juice, etc. And that was honestly about it. Then I was able to just go on my merry way. Overall, it was a really great experience. Everyone was super nice. And honestly, once the needle was in and taped down, it really wasn't that bad, as long as I held my arm still. Alright, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about why we take blood from the places that we do in the body, as well as about hemoglobin and the function of iron. Stay tuned.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
I'm back. Before the break, we were talking about the experience I had giving blood for the first time today. This is the first time in what feels like forever that I have been qualified to give blood due to my small stature. But it's also something that I have always wanted to do. I was already registered for the bone marrow registry, and so with all of the blood banks back open, now that some of the restrictions from COVID-19 have also been removed, I wanted to help be a part of that solution. So I went out to help replenish the blood supply that has been vastly depleted during this pandemic era. So I definitely had blood on the brain for the past month or so. We talked about it in Donation 101 last week, as well as in last month's episode on blood types. But I want to dive in a little bit further today and expand on some of the concepts we've discussed in the past. First up, why do we take blood from veins instead of arteries? There are a few reasons for that. Remember that arteries carry blood away from the heart and veins carry blood back to the heart. So your veins also end up being closer to the surface of your skin than your arteries are. So that means it's just a lot easier to get access to your veins and to see them than it is to do the same for arteries. You also don't have to do a deep dive with that needle to get a little bit of blood. Arteries also have thicker walls than veins do, so they can be harder to pierce. And there is also less blood pressure in veins than there are in arteries. So remember, those veins are just bringing the blood back. With the arteries carrying the blood away from the body, they have that extra oomph provided by the heart muscle, helping squeeze it out and promoting it throughout the rest of the body. With veins, it is not getting that extra oomph, so it has less blood pressure in there too. And in that way, it means that if we take blood from an artery instead of a vein, we are much more likely to see our blood spurt out everywhere, which is very upsetting to think about, as you can imagine. It's just not great for morale to take blood from arteries instead of veins. It can be very striking and disturbing to a lot of folks. So that helps us conserve more of the blood and also help manage people's expectations when they are giving blood. Since we tend to draw the blood from veins instead of arteries, then the process of getting your blood drawn is referred to as a venipuncture. And the blood that you collect from there is called venous blood because it's coming from your veins. Now that we know a little bit more about blood and how we draw it and how the donation process works, I want to talk about hemoglobin and what iron has to do with this process. If you have ever felt fatigued frequently or especially fatigued on certain days, then you may have had someone ask you if your iron might be low or offer you an iron supplement. Maybe that's just my friends, but I seem to wear my iron deficiency on my face. So I was very surprised today when my iron turned out to be pretty great. But I have been eating an overall improved diet lately. I've been getting more sunshine and working out too. So what does that really mean altogether? Well, iron, first off, is essential for producing more blood. That is one of the major reasons that they test you for it when you go to donate blood. And about 70% of the iron in your body is in your red blood cells. These are called hemoglobin, and it can also be in your muscle cells, in which case it's called myoglobin. Remember, heme or hemo means blood, and myo is referring to your muscles. So hemoglobin is really important for taking that oxygen-rich or oxygenated blood that has been invigorated by the lungs and then carried throughout your tissues. So it's really helping you get your blood to travel throughout your body. Myoglobin, on the other hand, is in your muscle cells, and it accepts, stores, transports, and releases oxygen. So it's just really in charge of oxygen handling. Think of hemoglobin as being like shipping, and myoglobin is more like receiving and storage, for the most part. Iron's also super important for respiration and for energy in your metabolism. Since it's a really important part of certain proteins in your body, that means it's also really important as a component of enzymes. It helps to create collagen and also some neurotransmitters in your body. Iron is also very important in ensuring that your immune system functions properly. So about 25% of the iron in your body is stored as a substance called ferritin. Remember that ferrous means iron, so this is just referring to iron again. This is found in cells, and it also is in your blood circulation. The average adult male has about 1,000 milligrams of stored iron in their bodies in that form of ferritin. Women, on average, only have about 300 milligrams. So that means that men have enough stored iron for roughly 3 years, but the average woman only has enough for about 6 months. So if a woman's iron gets very low, so we're not intaking as much as we need to, then the ferritin storage that we have can really become depleted. And then that means it's also going to decrease our levels of hemoglobin. Now that can also happen with men. Anyone can end up with low iron. However, women are much more likely to encounter this difficulty than men are. So you have iron deficiency, so you don't have enough iron, but when that storage of ferritin is completely depleted, then we call that iron depletion. So you can get even further decreases in your iron after your ferritin is totally depleted, and that is generally called iron deficient erythropoiesis. So that just means that you have iron deficiency, you have totally exhausted your storage of your iron, that ferritin, and you are still not getting enough iron in your body. But in addition to that, your iron deficiency is present without you also being anemic. And anemia is when you don't have enough healthy red blood cells to carry enough oxygen to the tissues throughout your body through your normal cardiovascular circulation. And anemia can make you feel tired and weak because these different areas of your body aren't getting enough of that oxygen that you need to perform regular functions. There are many different types of anemia, but the primary symptom for it is generally fatigue. And that's why if you're tired a lot, people will tend to ask you about your iron. Because one type of anemia is iron deficiency anemia. But just because you are iron deficient doesn't necessarily mean that you are anemic. Think about it as being kind of like a rectangle is a square, but a square is not a rectangle. So iron deficient erythropoiesis is when you have the medical condition that you don't have anemia. So you have a normal hemoglobin level. You have enough hemoglobin, but you are not able to have enough iron in your blood supply. So this is not iron deficient anemia. It's the other type. It's iron deficiency without anemia. So iron deficiency erythropoiesis. with erythropoiesis referring to the production of your red blood cells. So like iron deficiency with red blood cells, iron deficiency erythropoiesis. If you have iron deficiency without enough red blood cells or hemoglobin, then that is iron deficient anemia. Very similar, but there is the line that is drawn for those. Having iron deficient erythropoiesis can also contribute to further decline in your production of iron. And if you get to that point, then it can become iron deficient anemia. So you have iron depletion when your iron storages are completely empty, then that can lead to iron deficient erythropoiesis, and that can ultimately in turn lead to iron deficiency anemia if you continue to decrease your iron intake. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the most common causes of iron deficiency and how we can make sure that we are getting enough iron in our diets. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
We were talking about the function of iron in our blood supply and how it is very important for the production of blood and making sure that you are getting enough oxygen throughout your body in that cardiovascular system. We also talked about how iron depletion of our ferritin storage can lead to iron deficient erythropoiesis, and then further decreases can lead to iron deficiency anemia. Now we're going to talk about the most common causes of iron deficiency, as well as how to prevent it to keep our bodies running in as optimal shape as we can get them. So for men and postmenopausal women, iron deficiency is generally the result of some blood loss in the gastrointestinal system. And blood loss is the most common cause of iron deficiency across the board. In people who menstruate, though, then iron deficiency tends to be genitourinary in nature, and it's generally associated with your menstrual cycle. So that's where we're going with that one. And that often accounts for you needing increased iron at the time. If you take oral contraceptives, then that can help decrease the amount of blood you lose during your menstrual cycle. So if you have a very heavy flow, then you may well want to talk to your doctor about how oral contraceptives or an alternative could be helpful for you in regards to helping you out with your iron levels. So in this case, intrauterine devices, on the other hand, tend to increase your menstrual bleeding. So when we're talking about birth control methods, we want to make sure we are specifying oral contraceptives, birth control pills, rather than something like an intrauterine device. So like Kyleena or Mirena. because those can actually cause further blood loss. So we want to be very specific if we are going to go in and speak to our doctors about that. It's not that your IUD would be hurting you per se. It's just that it can lead to increases in menstrual bleeding. So if you already have a heavy flow, even if your iron stores are already totally fine or even optimal, it can still be an important consideration to make if you are just wanting to discuss contraceptives with your doctor for any other reason. I like to go in with eyes wide open, and I always ask my doctors lots of questions. I'm sure it might be a little bit annoying to some, but for most of them, they seem to appreciate me taking a vested interest in my health. But then again, you guys know how much I like doctors who act as an equal partner in my health and wellness plans. But that's just one consideration. There are also other types of genitourinary bleeding and respiratory tract bleeds that can increase your iron requirements. So even if you do have a heavy flow, there could be another cause, although it's much more likely to be due to your heavy flow. Make sure that you speak with your doctor to review all of your health concerns and really track down the underlying cause, especially if you're just feeling fatigued a lot of the time. I think that oftentimes women in particular, at least in my personal experience, tend to just expect to be tired all the time, especially as we become adults. And we just go, oh, okay, this is womanhood, just being exhausted all of the time. But that doesn't necessarily have to be true. And even if it feels normal to you, if other folks are perhaps mentioning that you seem to be fatigued more often than what they consider to be normal, then it's worth talking to your doctor about it. You may turn out to just have a different circadian rhythm than everyone else, and you're just not getting enough sleep, or they might refer you to a nutritionist to find out how to get more of these specific vitamins or nutrients that you are lacking in your diet, or from not going outside, etc. But oftentimes, my point is that they can help you track down why you're feeling fatigued and ultimately determine how far from the baseline of normal you really are. Are you within the normal range of variation and you're just not the specific average, and that's why you're not able to be an early bird like your friends? Is it more down to circadian rhythm? Or are you having some underlying issues that can be addressed and perhaps even change your life? It might seem to be a very small change to perhaps just not feel tired all the time, but I can tell you from having been on vitamin D supplements that there is, at least in my experience, a marked difference in taking those supplements and then also working to get those nutrients naturally in my diet and in my exposure to the elements as needed. Overall, it really helped me to have more energy, and so if you are experiencing chronic fatigue in your life, you don't have to necessarily chalk it all up to just being an adult. Sometimes there might be an underlying medical issue, and oftentimes that can be something that is easily corrected, as in my case with me just not eating with the types of health issues that I had in my experience in mind. So I wasn't eating with the thought of making sure I felt great all the time in mind. And now I do. Now I check myself and I go, hey, when's the last time I had some red meat? When's the last time I had some spinach or kale or other types of greens that are rich in these nutrients? When's the last time I sat outside for at least a little bit to get some sunshine and some of that vitamin D? All that jazz. And then I try to also plan those things out. So to that end, now that I have gotten used to thinking about it in past terms and examining the choices after I've made them, that can help me plan to make better choices going forward. So now I can do things like go, hey, I want to go on at least 2 hikes this week. And when I'm making my meal plan, I can go, okay, I have a lot of chicken and fish in here, a lot of lean meats and everything, but I tend to get most of my iron intake from these specific foods that I like. So let me work those into my diet as well, because I only have enough of those ferritin stores for about 6 months. So I want to make sure I'm planning to get these into my diet ahead of time, so I'm not dealing with deficiency later. It's honestly really changed the way that I look at my food, and it's really from more of a nutrition standpoint than anything else. It's not about diet, it's about nutrition for me. And by diet, I meant that in the colloquial terms. I mean that I'm not eating a fad diet in order to get a certain type of physique or anything like that. And if you are, that is totally your right, and I'm not going to give you a hard time about it. I just mean that for me, on my personal health and wellness journey, it has really helped me to think about these foods as being little vehicles that are tasty for the micronutrients and macronutrients that I need, and thinking beyond just lean meats and into more like asking myself during a self-check-in how I am feeling in general. Have I felt soreness lately, like in my shoulders or my neck area, my back, because I might need to adjust my posture in that regard, or maybe I'm not getting enough of certain macro or micronutrients. Perhaps I am also feeling fatigued a little bit, and then I can think about my circadian rhythm and how much sleep I've really been getting, the quality of sleep I've been getting, and think of ways to approach that. If you are someone who is very receptive to melatonin, then that might be a really good source for you. You might also want to examine your blue light usage before bed, things like that. So that's what I do in my self-checks, and if I am feeling more fatigued, I ask myself about my intake of B vitamins and iron, things like that. And then I can consider how much food I've been eating that has had those things in it, and what I need to improve in that regard in order to help me feel better. I don't keep a diary of this or anything like that. I have tried it, but I am horrible at keeping track of those things. That's something else I'm working on in my personal growth. But my point is that it doesn't even have to be all laid out in a bullet journal or anything like that. Just if you're feeling tired, ask yourself, hey, why am I feeling tired? Kind of like when we have headaches and we go, hey, is that from a ponytail being too tight, or is that me needing more water, or perhaps some caffeine, or getting something nutritious to eat? Things like that. We do the self-checks for the headaches, but we can also do them for a lot of other things in our lives. And I highly recommend it. Remember that we are all individuals, and health and wellness is holistic. So we need to look at our individual needs and patterns of behavior, as well as our individual goals in a holistic way to find what's best for us. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what that iron level means for blood donors and how iron is taken into the body, as well as what that COVID-19 antibody test really means for you if you're getting your blood drawn. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing iron as it relates to the causes in men and women, folks who menstruate and folks who don't, and also how to perform those self-checks to keep an eye on how we're feeling in ways that go beyond just, hey, I have a headache. What kind of headache is it? I find those to be very helpful for me, and I hope that they help you too in your individual wellness journey. We all approach it in different ways, but ultimately, just finding something that works for you can be really meaningful. Sometimes that involves throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. For me, planning my meals in a bullet journal did not work, but doing these self-checks does really work for me. And now I have practice in it in making sure that I'm asking myself these questions in the moment more frequently. Kind of like a mindful practice for the whys behind my fatigue, rather than just accepting that I'm tired and not really doing anything about it. So I'm just being consciously aware of my fatigue and seeking to understand it, but then also to prevent it. Now we're going to talk a little bit about iron requirements for giving blood, what those mean, and how you can get more iron into your body, in addition to what those COVID-19 antibody tests performed by blood banks really tell you. So, first up, if you are donating blood, each donation that you give results in you losing about 200 to 250 milligrams of iron. That means that they have to make sure that you have a good amount of iron in your body before you give blood in order to make sure that they're not going to push you into iron depletion or iron deficiency erythropoiesis or even iron deficient anemia. It's very important that you stay healthy to them as well. So during different periods of growth in our lifespans, your iron requirements might be more than how much you're getting from your diet or your ferritin. Growing another body inside of yours also can result in iron loss, as can bleeding during delivery and postpartum events, and that averages about 740 milligrams. So that's about 3 times as much as you would lose in a single donation of blood. In addition, breastfeeding can increase your iron requirements by about 0.5 to 1 milligram per day. So I say all that with keeping in mind that your ferritin stores are at about 300 for women, 300 milligrams. That's enough for about 6 months. So when you are giving blood, you're giving about 200 to 250 milligrams out of 300 of those. So they want to make sure that you have really good iron stores and iron levels before they allow you to give blood. They check it by pricking you with the lancet, and then they just take this little piece of plastic, kind of scoop your blood onto it, and test it in a machine. It takes all of about 5 seconds or so, and that determines whether or not it's safe for you to give blood based on your iron levels. The important thing to know about iron is that we don't make that in our bodies. We have to absorb it from our food, and that's why I was discussing nutrition so much in the previous segment. The minimum daily requirement of iron for adults is 1.8 milligrams. That really doesn't seem like a ton in this world of giving 200 to 250 milligrams when you are giving blood, and so on and so forth. And that's why they really give you that aftercare sheet when you go and give blood, and it recommends different foods for you to eat to replenish your iron stores, as well as supplemental vitamins to help you absorb it appropriately and more quickly. There's only about 10 to 30% of the iron that you eat that is absorbed into and used by the body. So you're trying to take in that 1.8 milligrams, but you're only getting about 10 to 30% of what you eat to be really absorbed by your body and used, either by storing it as ferritin or by using it in whatever processes your body needs it for at the time, like in your cardiovascular system, as we discussed earlier today. That daily requirement of iron can be acquired in different ways. If you are having trouble getting all of your iron and you talk to your doctor about that, they may recommend taking iron supplements. For example, ferrous sulfate at 325 milligrams might be recommended by your doctor to be taken by mouth once a day, but they also might just recommend that you eat more foods that are high in iron. Foods that are higher in vitamin C are also very important because of how it helps you to absorb iron. It's kind of like a carrier vitamin. It just helps it do a better job. If you cook in an iron pot, like an iron skillet, that can also add up to 80% more iron to your food. So using an iron skillet can also help you out a lot. I have also been using those more frequently recently, and that may be something that has helped me out a lot too, in addition to eating a lot more greens and not a ton of red meat, honestly, but I have been doing pretty well with keeping an eye on my red meat consumption too, and not pushing it totally away. If you're considering taking iron supplements, do talk to your doctor about it first. You might be feeling fatigued for different reasons. And we want to make sure that you are getting the correct micronutrient to help you feel better. If you're looking to get more iron into your diet, consider cooking in an iron pot/pan, so like a cast iron skillet. But also you can eat more lean beef, pork, lamb, chicken, turkey, liver, except for fish liver, not that one. You can also get it from fish and mussels and shellfish, all kinds of greens. I bought some microgreens the other day, and I'm very excited to have a salad with those later on, especially since they're from our local farmers market. But you can also get it from tofu, if you're into tofu. You can get it from broccoli, sweet peas, kale, bean sprouts, green beans, lima beans, tomatoes, potatoes, corn, beets, cabbage. All of these have that in there. They have a really great kale salad at one of the local pubs over here. And don't get me wrong, I've fought kale for a long time and mostly dehydrated it in order to eat it because it tasted really bitter to me. But y'all, they put some extra virgin olive oil on this kale and some lemon juice, some Parmesan, a few nuts for crunchiness. Maybe they're seeds. Think sunflower seeds, but they're not sunflower seeds. But it's very good, and it has worked very well for me in boosting my kale intake so far. It doesn't taste bitter at all. Everyone I know who does not like kale will still eat those kale salads. And now when we start craving something healthy, like in the vegetable realm, we often think about that specific salad and go grab one. So perhaps if you too feel the ick when you think about kale, this might be a good way for you to work it into your diet. I'm not gonna lie, I also often will make it very, very small in my smoothies and just drink my kale. The other way I've had it that was really good was a kale soup, but we did also make that with quinoa and a lot of broth and some Italian sausage. It was quite delicious, but if you're trying to avoid the oiliness of the sausage and such, then perhaps use a different type of meat in there. To each their own. Now that we've covered everything that I wanted to go over today in regards to hemoglobin and iron and how to get it in our foods to avoid types of anemia and such, I want to talk to you guys about what the antibody testing really means in these blood donation processes. So recently, a lot of these blood banks and the blood buses have opened back up, and they are testing folks for COVID-19 antibodies. Remember from my previous talks about the immune system that those antibodies are created when your immune system has come into contact with the virus or an inactivated form of that virus, like you would get in a vaccine. So if you have had that enter into your body and your body has fought it off or has been attempting to fight it off in any way, then you have antibodies formed as the antigen response in your body to these foreign invaders. That way the antibodies mean, hey, I recognize you the next time it sees something like the flu or COVID-19 in order to help you fight it easier. That's why we get vaccines for smallpox and such as well. So even if we do get these diseases later on, it tends to not be as severe. Instead of ending up with being infertile or having reactions that could potentially result in death, it is a much milder form, or oftentimes we don't get it at all because those antibodies recognize the strain of that virus and we are able to fight it off a lot easier. Sometimes with just a small fever that goes away overnight. So once your body has created these antibodies against COVID-19, then we can see that you have had it in the past. So these antibody tests are showing whether you have long-term antibodies to COVID-19. So it doesn't mean that it's diagnosing you as having COVID-19 right now. It just means that you've been exposed to COVID-19 in the past, and your body formed its immune response as it's supposed to do. According to an article dated in late May, the scientists believe that it takes about 3 weeks after someone first becomes ill or first contracts COVID-19 for those long-term antibodies to show up in your blood. And remember, you can have it and not have any symptoms for it. So you can have COVID-19 antibodies and look back and go, hey, I haven't even felt like I've had a cold. Remember, we're all individuals and we're going to react to this very differently. That's just how it works for everyone. So when we're thinking about long-term antibodies for COVID-19, we don't know how long they actually last. So long-term antibodies for other viruses that are not COVID-19 can last for decades or as few as just a couple of months. So a lot of people are curious about whether or not they have antibodies to see if maybe, hey, do I have COVID-19 right now? But you're likely to not be getting that result if you're going to go donate blood. It's not a diagnostic test. It's not going, hey, you have COVID-19 right now. It's just saying, hey, you've had this in the past. So I've had a similar thing actually happen in my personal life when I was being tested for some autoimmune diseases, and I had had mono before. So the virus that's associated with that Epstein-Barr was popping up on there, and it was an antibody test. So they're like, hey, this isn't telling you that you have this right now, but rather that you have had it in the past. Do you know if you've had it in the past? And I said, yes, I have had that in the past. I had that when I was in college, and that's something that I already knew. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to move past that one then, because that's what these levels are showing us too, is that this isn't in your system right now. It's not something that's super recent. It was likely years ago. So they can actually tell that by studying these viruses long term and seeing how long it takes for them to get out of your body. So think about it as being like the half-life of a certain element. How long does it take it to degrade? And that's kind of how it works for these antibodies. How long do they last in the body? Just like different elements have different half-lives, also different antibodies to different viruses are going to last for different periods in our bodies. Long term for COVID may not be the same thing as long term for Epstein-Barr or the flu strains. So a lot of folks are thinking that you can just go and get tested for it, but that's not what this does. So if you're donating blood just to get tested for COVID-19, it's not going to tell you if you're sick right now. It's generally going to tell you that you have been exposed to coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, within 3 weeks or more before coming to your appointment, and that your body mounted some form of response to it. I know a lot of people are a little freaked out, and we didn't have a lot of diagnostic tests early on in this pandemic, so a lot of folks couldn't get tested. It is important, though, to know if you had COVID-19 antibodies, because that can be helpful for other researchers, scientists, and folks who are fighting COVID-19 right now, too. So if you believe that you very well may have already had COVID-19, but that you just had a run-of-the-mill version even, or if you're like, I don't really know if that was COVID-19 or something else like the flu because I had such a mild presentation of it, it's very important that you still consider donating blood if that is something you are able to do. I know there are a lot of reasons that different people are not able to donate blood, but if you are able to do so, I urge you to consider going out and donating blood right now. Even if you don't think that you have the antibodies, the Red Cross has mentioned that we have a staggering drop in our blood supplies. Remember, a lot of blood banks were not able to operate appropriately during COVID-19. They weren't able to solicit new donations of blood, but now hospitals have resumed elective surgeries, and a lot of folks are heading out and about again as we're all in different stages of reopening. But there's still a pandemic out there, and we're still struggling to get that rate of blood donations to bounce back to what they were before. So if you have a blood connection around you, or you have access to another facility/organization that accepts blood donations for these causes, then I encourage you to go out and donate today. Remember, getting a positive identification of antibodies from COVID-19 in this process does not mean you currently have it. It's not diagnostic. It just tells you that you have had it in the past. So if you're seeking a COVID-19 test, you still need to go to a doctor if you're looking for a current diagnosis. All this test is going to tell you is whether or not your body's mounted an immune response to it in the past. That is still very valuable for people who are wanting to donate blood that has COVID-19 antibodies, but I also just want to make sure that everyone has it clear as to what the test can and can't tell you, and make sure that you're getting the medical treatment that you need from the appropriate sources who are able to give you what you need. If you get this COVID-19 test performed on your blood by your local blood donation center when you donate, then that antibody test will give you either a positive result, which means that you have the antibodies, meaning that you have had exposure to COVID-19 in the past and also formed an immune response to it, or you'll get a negative result, and that means that there are no antibodies there, which just means that your body has not mounted an immune response to COVID-19 in the past. Keep in mind that a positive result, meaning that you have antibodies to COVID-19, does not mean that you have immunity to COVID-19. The researchers are still working out what the antibodies specifically mean for your strength of immunity to COVID-19, how long that immunity and or those antibodies might last, and so on and so forth. So this doesn't mean that it's necessarily safe for you to go out without a mask or to not socially distance yourself or anything like that. It just means that your body's mounted an immune response to it in the past. Hopefully, as scientists learn more about this, then we can make better informed decisions about work and community events, and also use the scientific guidance to help our local representatives make decisions about when and what should be reopened in certain orders to make sure that everyone is safe overall. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.